Cliff Weitzman, how are you?
I'm very, very well. I'm excited to be here with you. How about you, my man?
Thank you for joining me in these crazy, crazy times. Are you safe and healthy?
I am safe and healthy up in Northern California.
Wonderful.
Yeah, riding out the self-isolation with my family. So finding the silver lining.
Finding the silver. Let's talk in a few months and see the silver lining. All right, so we met on and off over the years. I've been a fan for many years, and I just want to go back to your childhood because I just love.
Okay.
It's one of the stories that I love most. Uh, Way before Brown, way before Speechify. You have dyslexia. You're very open about it.
Yes,
You wrote
yes.
a lot about it. Tell me, what is it like growing up with dyslexia and the challenges it brings?
Sure. So I grew up in Israel, and I moved to the U.S. when I was 13. Yeah. And when I was in preschool, I was like the most precocious kid that could be. I was in all the school plays. I was like dancing. I was writing songs. Um, and then in first grade, I couldn't figure out how to read. And in second grade, I couldn't figure it out either. And in third grade, I couldn't figure it out either. And I really wanted my parents to be proud of me, and especially my dad. And they really valued education, and so I did too. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get this whole reading thing to work. And my teachers started to think that I was slow or lazy. And I didn't think I was either one of those things. I thought I was awesome. I just needed to figure out how to make the outside world realize this about me. And I um, just started practicing really hard to try and figure out how to read. And I got to the point where I could read well enough, but not, the average reading speed in the United States is 200 words per minute. So I got to roughly that speed. And though that speed is average, it is not adequate. If you reach that average reading speed, you're not going to be an avid reader, and you're not going to like love books and love reading. But eventually, I found audiobooks, and initially, what happened is I really wanted to read this one book, Harry Potter. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't figure it out. So my dad actually took pity on me, and he sat with me in my bed, and he read this book to me. And I loved it so much that he started recording himself in a cassette tape, and he would walk, and I would walk around the house later listening to the Harry Potter in Hebrew. And right before we moved to the US, we found an audiobook of Harry Potter in English. And so my dad got that for me, and I started listening to that audiobook that did not speak English yet at the time, but I knew the story really well. And I listened to Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone 22 times in a row in English. And that's how I learned English. And so when I first moved to the States, I had a British accent. Aloha more was my first vocabulary word. Sadly, I lost the accent. But from that experience, I fell in love with audiobooks. So I listened to 2 audiobooks a week, every week, and I've done that for about 15 years. Um, so more than 100 books a year. And when I started college, I realized that most textbooks didn't have an audiobook.
Right.
Most Wikipedia pages didn't have an audiobook. The majority
Articles
of
don't have
those,
audiobooks.
yeah, my emails, essays I wrote, the majority of things that we read don't have audiobooks. And so I started using text to speech. And
Yep.
that changed my life too, because and there was no good text to speech software at the time. And so I cobbled something together that worked much better than the existing things.
I remember that
Um,
robotic text to speech that Windows has, right? Where
exactly.
it's like the robot, you insert a sentence and it reads it out in a very monotone way. I think The
And then
Office
also,
made a joke with it. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. It's like, I am a computer, I can talk to you. And the big problem is you can't easily enter text into that. Like if you have a physical handout, you
Right.
can't have the speech on that.
Yeah.
You can't change the speed. You can't play and pause.
Yep.
And so I built this software for my computer that let me highlight any text, click a keyboard shortcut, and it would start to read it to me. I built an iPhone app that let me scan physical textbooks and physical handouts, and it would read that too. And then I built a news integration into Speechify that would actually scrape the internet, and I could just open the app and it'll read anything I want. And did it using deep learning to create really high quality voices, really high quality optical character recognition and OCR, really high quality NLP, and it was amazing. It didn't matter that I was dyslexic from that point on. And so I actually I founded the renewable energy engineering major at Brown, and I built about 36 products when I was an undergrad because I didn't need to spend my time doing homework. I would longboard to breakfast while listening to my book, eat breakfast while listening to my book, like work out, show up in class, and I already knew everything because I listened to the reading, while most other people didn't. And it was on that spare time I just started a company. So I built
Cliff, let's go back because people are saying some people are visual learners, some are listeners, some are you have to do something active. So do you have a gift of being able to learn through listening very very well? And is this or do you believe that just it's a capacity that everybody has? Because for me it's still a little difficult focusing while an audiobook is running. I find myself drifting off, and all of a sudden I'm 20 minutes in and I have no idea where I left off.
So if you look at it, right, we've been listening for 150,000 years. We've been reading for only about 4,000. And evolution doesn't move that quickly. When you start elementary school, no one expects you to read fast, and no one expects you to have high reading comprehension. In fact, we expect it to take a decade before you become a good reader. And listening is the same way, just slightly less extreme. So when you first listen to an audiobook, you're still not good at listening. You have to practice. And so what we find for people who use Speechify is they improve over time. When I started listening to those Harry Potter audiobooks in English, I didn't even speak the language. So I wasn't listening at 1x speed. I was listening at 50x speed, and then 0.75x speed for the first couple of times, and then 1x speed. And then it was natural for me to go to 1.25. And so I know many people who had the same experience. For when they started at 0.75, and then 1x, and then 1.25, and 1.5, and then 2x. And here's what will always happen. It takes about 10 audiobooks, but on the 11th audiobook, you'll get to the point where you have now learned this mechanism. And so retention goes up, ability to listen faster goes up, ability to multitask and do other things while you listen goes up, and comprehension goes up. And so for most people, if you start your first audiobook, you can't expect yourself to be able to drive and listen, or listening to X speed and listen. It's something that you have to practice. Now, like most things in life, there's predisposition. So I'm predisposed to not being very good at doing the visual decoding of words. Therefore, I compensate by being good at listening. And so there is a segment of the population that is naturally better at listening, and a segment of the population that is naturally better at reading.
Your senses are heightened in one direction to compensate for another. Makes perfect sense.
I have many friends who are exceptional at visual learning. My friend Max can sit and in one sitting finish an entire book in 2 hours. But Max consumes 90% of his information via audiobooks because he also practiced listening because we were really good friends, and he got into this. And so he listens to nearly as many audiobooks as I do per year. And it's just the case that because when you listen, you have 2 hours of passive time every single day. Where you're on the toilet, you're brushing your teeth, you're cleaning your room, you're eating dinner, you're driving to work. And in that time, you can listen. But you have to make dedicated time in order to read. And that's really hard. And so it is important to be able to do both. And so that's my experience. So for anyone who says, oh, I'm not an auditory learner, well, first of all, that's fine. But you have to listen to books or read books, at least. Consume books in any way you want. But for me, after my parents, the number one thing that's most impacted my life is books. And I attribute so much of who I am and what I've been able to accomplish at my age to that. So that's fine. If you're not an auditory learner, fine. But you need to be reading at least like 5 books a month. And if you're not reading 5 books a month, then you can't knock it. You need to go practice listening as well.
Totally. Okay, so you started a company called Speechify. Talk to me about the growth. Where is it at now? And what's some of your responses? Because at the end of the day, if you go on your website, the first thing that you do is you hear your voice reading a book, right? Which is, I think, genius. And one of the amazing things that you can actually use this app to not only read audiobooks, but you can read anything that your heart desires, from emails, texts, to articles, to physical handouts that you just scan. And he showed me how in 2 seconds you can scan 10 pages and have it read to you, even in Cliff's voice. So talk to me a little bit about what you've seen and what have you learned about this consumer behavior around listening?
So when I was in college, I built like 36 different things in a bunch of different categories. Skateboard brakes, biotech supplements, payments companies, websites, apps, etc. And when I was about to graduate, I did this experiment with myself. And I was like, if I was a billionaire right now, what would I want to work on? And the conclusion was I want to solve dyslexia. And so I took this product pretty seriously. And we could talk later about how it came to be and how it got product market fit. But Essentially, it does exactly what you described. You can scan anything, you can upload material, you can change the speed. It has an automatic speed ramping algorithm that improves your speed over time. And so Speechify now is
Yeah. So
used
by
to
the way, at what speed do you listen to now? How many words per minute?
when I listen, if I'm doing it on my computer, I listen at 750 to 800 words per minute. So the average reading speed is 200,
800 words a minute,
800 words a minute when I
where the
listen.
average reading is 200 words a minute.
It's 200. So I listen 4 times faster than most people read. But that's when I'm reading on my computer. And if, let's say, you send me an email, I'm following with my eyes as I'm listening with my ears. And that's reading in order to respond. It's not reading for pleasure or for long-term retention.
So it's dedicated, concentrated reading.
Dedicated, concentrated reading. And I'm getting the email from you. It is in context. And then I immediately responding. If I'm walking around and I'm driving, I listen at like 550. And so that's the equivalent if you listen to like podcasts at like 1.25 2x. That's like listening to a podcast or an audiobook at 3x speed. That's what my like pleasure listening is. And the Speechify will coach you to do this. So what we find is usually people when they start Speechify, they'll listen at 230 words per minute, and a month in they'll be at 300, and 2 months in they'll be at like 350.
Really, it's that fast.
Yeah, it is like a logarithmic
Really?
improvement in retention speed. And here's a couple of things that were non-obvious to us that we learned over time. Number one, you can practice listening, and as you practice listening, your speed improves.
Yep.
Number two, the reasons why people were not using text-to-speech before is number one, the voices were so mechanical that it turned people off. And so what we did is we focused on a group of people that did not care about the quality of the voices. People with dyslexia, ADD, low vision, concussions, the people like me, reading is a hair on fire problem. And so if you can solve it in any way possible, they'll put up with anything. And so we just built by far the best solution for text-to-speech that exists in the world. And that's why we just had tremendous amount of adoption. So people listen to billions of words on Speechify every month. And we get like 20 messages a week of people who tell me, hey, I saw your app, I downloaded it, I started crying at my desk.
I see that. You have these reviews on the App Store. It's crazy.
I
don't know many app reviews that have the sentence, I started crying when I discovered this.
Yeah. And it's interesting too because for us it's like it's the coolest thing in the world. And so we ended up building a very strong team around us. So now we're 30 engineers, and we're actually a distributed team. We're all around the world. And so we worked really we weren't very affected by the situation that we have right now. And I can go later about how hiring works at Speechify. And now Speechify we actually recently started to do news within the app. And so within 2 weeks of doing news, we're now ranked the number 4 app in the magazine and newspapers category of the App Store.
Oh my God.
And
number 4?
Number 4. Yeah, we're above the Wall Street Journal and above Washington Post.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Insane. Wait, Cliff, I have to take a diversion here because you're one of the most accessible people that I know in terms of response time and willingness to help, willingness to collaborate. At the same time, you're one of the busiest people that I know. How does that happen? How are you so responsive? How do you make yourself? How do you characterize yourself as a persona as a person that people want to be around? Because I want to learn from that.
So when I was finishing school, I wrote this paper. It was a 30-page paper about my worldviews. And it started with a summary of my childhood. And then it ended up with the conclusion of like what I believe. There are things that I believe that other people don't believe. And so I made it into like a 20 bullet point list. And really I concluded that I was shaped by being very lucky to be born to the family that I'm part of. So my siblings, my parents, etc. My experience overcoming dyslexia, all the books that I read, listen to, Speechify. And the fact that I have a tremendous bias towards action. I'm the type of person that always raises his hand in class. I think that like at least 50% of the time, if I'm in the audience, and like 10,000 people in the audience and a cool person was on stage, I somehow end up on a stage. If I have an idea, I just immediately I go and do it. And so I get to like reality check myself a lot. And one of those principles that I realized over time is if I have the opportunity to significantly improve someone else's life with a short period of time, do it.
Yeah.
And it takes very little effort for me to do that because number one, I just have a lot of energy in general. So I don't sleep as much as most people do. Number two, if I'm interacting with other human beings, boom, it's like I have like 3 extra engines that kick into power. And so that makes it easy for me. And so, and I'd rather do something now than do something later.
Yep.
And I have this philosophy, and I developed it in college, that when I have a cool idea, ride that initial wave as fast as you can. And so you message me, hey, let's do this thing. I was like, great. How about this time? There's another rule, which is never, ever, ever, if you're trying to set a time, ask the other person. If they're like, oh, would you want to do this? Yeah, sure. What time do you want to do it? No, bullshit. You just wasted everybody's time. Always response with absolutely. How about this time, at this day, at this time? You always have to suggest the date and like 2 available times at that date. And if you don't, in my book, it's rude. Yeah, and so if I have the opportunity to help people, I do. And usually it's in the form of helping other people develop new habits or learn new information.
Yeah.
And
No, because I think it's just in the age that we're in now, everything is so online, and sometimes I find it incredible how there are some people that are online and they're so responsive, and you know how busy they are, and you know that they're doing a million other things, but they still find a way to be very responsive. One of my personal mentors, Dan Ariely, he's I know him for anytime I'll send him something, within 20 minutes I have a response. And it blows my mind, how can I get a response that quickly from one of the busiest people in the world? And my dad told me when I was young, if you want something done, give it to the busiest person in the room. And so that's something that I've been trying to adopt myself, and thinking, okay, if there's something that I can get done within 2 minutes, then I just do it now. I don't delay it. I don't write it down, because just writing it down to do will take me about as much time as just doing it.
yes.
And I definitely get a lot of inspiration from the way that you deal with everything around you, and how proactive you are in doing these things. Cliff, you have to go back to helping dyslexic people learn and be successful in the world. But before that, I need 3 words that describe you.
So many people are familiar with the idea of IQ, intelligence quotient, EQ, emotional intelligence. There's a third one that most people don't know about, which is AQ, adversity quotient. So
Yep.
adversity quotient is the measure of how good you are when faced with an insurmountable challenge. If you look at the population of people with dyslexia in the world, about half the people in prisons have dyslexia, and 40% of billionaires have dyslexia.
Wait. Half the people in prisons have dyslexia?
Because that's what happens. What happens is, when you're young, if you're 7 years old and you fail at the one thing you're supposed to be good at, eventually you end up stopping out of school, unless you have this gigantic motor inside of you that when everybody else tells you you're lazy, you're stupid, you're a failure,
Wow.
you're like, no, I'm awesome. You just don't know it yet. And then you work your butt off to make sure that everybody understands that. And so once you build that internal clock inside of you, that feeds your confidence and gives you perseverance to that degree, you're unstoppable. And so it's almost like trial by fire at a very young age. So the first one is, I'm a person who just has super high adversity quotient. The second one is, I would either say like confidence or charismatic. And that's also something that's like cultivated over time. And you know what? Books have been super helpful for that. I highly recommend How to Win Friends by Dale Carnegie.
Yep.
And the third one, part of me wants to be like intellectually curious or like introspective, but actually kind-hearted is more important. So kind-hearted would be the third one.
I love it. Cliff, thank you so much. This was a pleasure.